Miami has been on a tear of late, and while there's plenty of optimism from Heat fans, are we overestimating their chances at a title based on their past success? Plus, with just 22 games left in the season, is there still time for Erik Spoelstra to tweak the rotation before the playoffs? Is starting Duncan Robinson over Tyler Herro an option? We'll get into that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always is longtime NBA reporter David Ramil. However you're tuning in, YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Got a fun show for you today. We're going to be talking about a few tweaks that Erik Spoelstra can make to get the Heat ready for the playoffs, including a possible starting lineup change, David. I might be changing my opinion on something that I have been very reluctant to change my opinion on in the past. But let's start with this tweet from our friend Matt Moore, who you do the Monday night show on Locked On NBA with. You sent me this tweet. I thought it was an interesting talking point. He says, I've been really thinking a lot about the fact that we as a basketball talking community probably majority think that the Heat have a better chance at the title than the Thunder. And what that says, it doesn't have to be wrong. It's just interesting. I think that is fair. I think that is interesting. You look at where the Heat are in the standings versus where the Thunder are in the standings. The Thunder, talking 5:30-ish on Monday, 42-18 with the best record in the Western Conference. They have been gangbusters all season, have one of the best net ratings in the league all season, have a legit MVP contender in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, maybe the only legit MVP contender outside of Nikola Jokic right now. Maybe, you might put Giannis up there. But those are the guys, right? And which says a lot. And you've got Miami, 7th place in the East, a game and a half out of 4th, but still 7th. Just sort of a ho-hum point differential, just above, just 0.7 points per 100 possessions better. And 34-26, just right in the middle of the pack of the Eastern Conference. And I do think with how the Heat have played lately and their track record and the fact that you quote-unquote can't ever count out the Heat, which all solid points. Like, I'm here for all of it, but
Right.
Like, I don't know that we need to contrast necessarily Miami to the Thunder or anything like that,
Right.
but like just the idea that we would look at the number one team in the stronger conference and just be like, that team probably doesn't have as much of a chance of reaching the finals as the 7th seed Miami Heat. What does that say to you?
It's really difficult to kind of parse through it because I feel like not just fandom certainly has that, but even just like media coverage, you get to the point where you're very insular. It's almost like its own bubble of narratives and ideas and preconceived notions about whatever team you have. Like, 3 months ago, a majority of Heat fans were like, blow it up, trade Jimmy Butler, this team sucks, etc. And then, things start to turn in the right direction. And eventually you're back to where we started, where I think the vast majority of Heat fans, certainly a loud majority of fans that, watch our show and listen to our show, would probably agree that they're not scared of any team in the Eastern Conference, and there's a good chance that they could advance all the way to the NBA Finals. And that seems like, again, in a vacuum, a ludicrous statement considering where they are right now. And I know the argument, and Matt says this in follow-up tweets, is he understands that based on past experience, even the most recent playoff run, Miami has proven it, whereas Oklahoma City has not. But it's just interesting how we kind of go forward with this idea that Miami does seem like a much better option and much more likely to advance than even a very good Oklahoma City Thunder team. And I don't know. I don't know how to separate those aspects. I don't know if it's just, again, my coverage of the team, fandom of the team, etc., that kind of colors our perception or perceptive here, because it really is just, it's very, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it.
I think you hit it on the head. The Heat have done it and the Thunder haven't. And we look at the Miami Heat, we as in like a basketball media coverage sort of conglomerate here. Just like we look at the Miami Heat. Hey, you got Jimmy Butler, you got Erik Spoelstra. They've done this. 2 out of the last 5 years, almost, or 2 out of the last 4 years, almost 3 of the last 4 years. There's a chance if they go back, it'd be 3 of the last 5 years. Like this championship DNA, Pat Riley, blah blah blah, Heat culture.
Sure.
Like we see all of that and attribute those things to team that can win championship. Whereas the Oklahoma City Thunder haven't been there since Kevin Durant was playing for them, not since 2012. Right. They're a really young team, right? Even Shai Gilgeous-Alexander playing at this level is still so young. Chet Holmgren is a rookie, and he's their second, third most important player. Jalen Williams, second year forward, right up there with them. Mark Daigneault, a coach that most people, like if you showed them a picture, wouldn't know who that person is. I'm not even saying people, casual basketball fans, people who watch the NBA might not even know. He is anonymous to most people.
I would imagine he has a hard time getting into most other team arenas. Like he probably gets in there and you might not know who he is. Yeah, I can imagine. That would be. It's like, he's got a nice Thunder pullover. That's great. I don't know who you are.
I don't know who you are. Do you know the team? So all those things I get, and yet, I don't know, the part about young teams, and Chris Herring wrote this piece for ESPN today, kind of comparing the Thunder to the 73-win Warriors, and that team that went to the finals, and I think and he would admit that it's a little hyperbolic, but the point being that a team hasn't made the finals until they've made the finals, right? And this Thunder team is so dominant, offensively, so dominant, defensively, has all the things that you would want, except for maybe the rebounding stuff. But on paper, they have just as good a chance, if not better than anybody else, to make the finals this year. And I went back and I looked at some of the net ratings. Let's just kind of boil everything down to net ratings, although there's a bunch of other stats that you can look at. But I like the net rating one. Over the last few years of teams that have made the finals, right? So we look at last year. Denver had a net rating of plus 3.3 points per 100 possessions that they were outscoring their opponents by. That's actually pretty low, even for a finals team. They usually, these finals teams hover around 5 to 7 in terms of what their net rating is. Miami last year was a negative net rating going into the playoffs and then made the NBA finals. So both Denver, even though they had a positive net rating, and Miami were a little bit of anomalies last year in terms of teams that make the finals. In 2022, Boston had a net rating of 7.4. The Warriors were 5.5. The year before that, Milwaukee 5.8, Phoenix 5.9. In 2020, Miami 2.7, the Lakers 5.6. In 2019, Golden State 6.5, Toronto 5.8, and then before that, you had a bunch of years of just Golden State and Cleveland blowing the doors off of everybody in the regular season and making the finals. So those tend to be 5 to 7 is right where a team tends to be in net rating that can make the finals. Miami this year has a net rating of 0.7. Right? The Thunder are I'm sorry, I have this. Where are the Thunder here? I have to look this. The Thunder are at 8.0. Now the thing about Miami is that their net rating since February 1st is 7.8. That's an NBA Finals net rating. But based on the totality of the season, I would get how we kind of look at Miami like, are we sure they're going to do what they did last season again?
Right. To me, I just wonder whether or not we're at a point now where we might start to see a shift. Like Matt, again, and other subsequent tweets, it almost feels like it was sometimes he goes on these crusades. They last a couple of days, they last maybe even a whole weekend. And I think this was the case now where he's kind of trying to show the historical fallacy of Miami's chances of being able to advance there. And he's been on this sticking point for a while. He does not believe that Miami can get to the finals because he thinks that what they did last year in terms of that, that jump and shooting as the playoffs rolled around is unduplicatable. You cannot do that again. And so that was what Miami's key to success was and why they were able to knock off other teams. I think we even encountered some tweets like that too. A lot of Boston fans are saying Boston should have been there last year because Miami wasn't the better team. And that was the case all regular season. But is Miami at a point now where they're shifting the idea of how much value there should be in the regular season? Maybe it's just a matter of construction. Maybe it's a matter of Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy spoke about this recently in an interview to Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report. Are we getting to the point now where Miami and the way they're constructed, and Jimmy specifically, can just say, I don't give a damn about 82 games. That, none of that matters. We busted our ass 2 years ago. And
I don't think so. I don't
first
think so.
seed.
I think we could prioritize different things in the regular season. And Erik Spoelstra has been pretty open about this recently about, hey, obviously you got to win enough games to get to the playoffs, but you're trying to experiment. The regular season is a marathon and the playoffs is a chess game. They're two different kind of games, right? And so I think over the course of a regular season, you're just trying to find answers and solutions about what this team is and what kind of different moves you can get to in the playoffs. And I think so the regular season, a guy like Erik Spoelstra, he approaches it like an experiment. And that's the tricky balance is, okay, we got to figure out, like, is Nikola Jovic a starter? Can he play for us? Like, what can we actually get out of a rookie like Jaime Jaquez? Is this a rotation piece for us in the postseason? Also, how many games do we have to win in order to get out of the play-in tournament and make the playoffs in the first place? Because you can't just take that stuff for granted. And so, and I think Jimmy Butler, to your point too, also takes it in stages. He basically told Chris Haynes flat out, after the All-Star break, I kick it into another gear. And you're like, all right, cool. And that works for you. Like LeBron has talked about this too, about pacing yourself in the past. Like that's not a novel thing that's just unique to Jimmy Butler. It's just so loud the way that Jimmy Butler does it.
Yeah, but I mean, LeBron may have been doing that like over the last 2 seasons. And again, that's at his age and given everything else. He wasn't pacing himself, when he came into the league, and certainly wasn't when he was
even like
three.
Kawhi with the load management, even Dwayne Wade towards the end of the big three, the load management with him. Like people have done versions of this before. But I do think that – so I would push back and say the regular season doesn't matter. I just think you have to prioritize different things during the regular season, where I think the team like a Thunder right now or other teams are like, hey, let's just win as many games as we can. And that's awesome, and that's great for fans. And it's great for a Thunder team that needs that proof of concept because I do think that Miami doesn't need to prove it to themselves that they can win games. A young team like the Thunder, they got to go out and win games to prove to themselves that they can win games. Like Miami doesn't need to prove that. So they could prioritize
beyond the
these other
standings.
things.
Right. Beyond the standings, there's a psychological advantage that Miami has over other teams. And I would say even over a team like the Boston Celtics. Like there is an inherent belief in that locker room that regardless of their record, once they're at 0-0 at the start of any playoff series, they've got a much better chance than the other team, whoever that team might be, of advancing. And that makes them kind of unique in that sense. Yeah. So a very special combination of players with the right elements of a player that believes it, a coach that believes it, a well-prepared coach that sees it in the way that you laid out before in terms of how these matchups have to play out, and just also a structural belief also. That does make for a very unique combination. And maybe you're putting too many what was it, dominoes in the basket in terms of like, oh, we can do this again. We've done it for the past 4 years. Can we do it again for a 5th season? But I don't know. That just seems how they're wired. Until they can't do it anymore.
They want to back in the way they did last year in the 8th as the 8th.
Absolutely
seed.
not.
This team, like last year, this team couldn't make a 3-pointer to save its life in the regular season. They're 11th right now in 3-point shooting percentage this year. So that's different. Like I do think this team is very different than last year's Heat team. I think the reason this year's Heat team is as low in the standings as they are is they've been dealing with all these injuries and these lineup changes.
I think they're better, right? I think they're better than last year's team.
I would say so. But doesn't that now?
That doesn't necessarily
every
translate.
Every playoff is a different animal, right? Like it's a different atmosphere, and maybe they make it to the finals or not. But I think this team is better than last year's regular season team, and I would bet that the Heat think the same thing. One last thing on this, I also think they think that home court advantage, like a top 4, 3, 2, 1 seed in the East, is a little bit overrated because you can work 82 games to get home court, or you could just go to the playoffs, win one of those first 2 games on the road, and you've got home court advantage, right? And it's different in basketball than it is in the NFL, right? Like in the NFL, you play 1 game on your home field or on the road.
Yeah, it's
in the NBA, you get home games. You still get the home. It's not like all 7 games.
You don't want to be on Game 7 on the road,
New York or something.
And yet even then, Miami with everything going into Boston Celtics and the TD Garden and everything
really
should historically say, there's no chance of them winning. It's like, oh, okay, well, we'll just blow out the team instead.
Right. And that part's unique to Miami, and every team has their own unique things too. But that part is very unique to the Miami Heat. All right,
Tatum's ankle. Sorry.
Do the Heat need to finally consider a starting lineup change when Tyler Herro comes back? We talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Listen, we've talked about this before. If you're just listening to the show right now, it's something that we talk about quite a bit here because sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, whether it's big or small. Things can start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, and especially with somebody who's not biased about those things going on in your life. You could talk to a friend, a family member, a coworker. Chances are they're connected with you and they're already going to have their own preconceived ideas. So you want somebody with a fresh perspective. That's why you need therapy. And if you're thinking about trying therapy, then BetterHelp is the option for you. Believe me, it's just more than just sports. There's a lot of different things going on out there for all of us, and it can really wear on you. And if you're looking for somebody to talk to, again, give BetterHelp a chance. Therapy can be different for everyone, but you know what? This is tailored just to you. You can find who you're looking for online. It's very simple, very easy, and it's tailored to you so that you can make a switch if you need to. Whatever you're looking for, you will find it with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA, and you get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. If you're watching us, Locked On Heat on YouTube, and you're not subscribed, well, hit that subscribe button. Like the video, comment, let us know what you think about the Miami Heat's approach to the regular season. And the next question we're going to ask, which is basically this, David. Based on what we've seen this season, what we know about these two players, is it time to strongly consider starting Duncan Robinson over Tyler Herro? And I know we've had this conversation in a million different ways in the past, but I think the context, the situation right now is a little bit different. And you know where I have stood on this.
Yeah.
West heads in general agree with me on this. Tyler Herro's the better player. You start the better player. You start Tyler Herro. He deserves to start. He's done nothing to jeopardize his position in that starting unit. And yet, this team does undeniably thrive when Duncan Robinson is starting in Tyler Herro's place, whether it's because of injury or otherwise. This year, it's been because of injury. But what do you think?
Yeah.
Where are you on this right now?
You brought up a good point before we started recording, and it's kind of changed my perspective. Again, I've made both arguments. Mm-hmm. I think it's also one that's very difficult to broach with Tyler. And listen, I know everybody's saying, "Oh, well, you've had all these players embrace a bench role in the past." That's every situation is different, and you're right in terms of those players that have historically understood. Sometimes it's better to come off the bench, etc. Very few of them are Tyler Herro at his respective point in his career, making the money he has, having accomplished what he has over the first few years of his career. Like, he is a very good player. And he views himself, the franchise views him, and there are people around the league that see him as a potential star, like at least at an all-star level caliber at some point in his career. Like, he is, what is it, 23, 24 now? He's got a bright future ahead of him in the NBA. It is very difficult and very different than telling 36-year-old Dwayne Wade, "Hey, can you come off the bench for us for one last season?"
Right.
Whereas telling 24-year-old Tyler, "Hey, you got to come off the bench for it." So there are
like
egos.
Manu Ginobili in his 30s. Yeah. People always point to Manu, and it's like, dude, that guy was. Like,
he played a whole other career outside of him before coming to the NBA. Like, it's like, oh, we didn't do it in the NBA. Well, he was doing it elsewhere.
And also,
he was in Europe for a long time.
And to your point, as a young player in Tyler Herro, like, you have to worry about the way that you are presented to the rest of the NBA. Are you presented as a starter who can make an all-star game or a sixth man of the year? And the difference between, like, Jordan Clarkson and one of the top starting shooting guards in the NBA is a big difference. And Tyler Herro thinks that he could be one of the best scoring guards in the NBA. Like, Tyler Herro thinks he could be Brad Beal at his prime, Devin Booker at his prime. Like, that's what Tyler Herro thinks he can do.
Absolutely.
And if he's coming off the bench, he's never going to be looked at in that way. And so I understand him taking care of his own. And just to preface all this whole conversation with, I'll believe Erik Spoelstra brings Tyler Herro off the bench when I see it. He's had opportunities to do it in the past, and he's been reluctant to. And for the most part, I've agreed with Erik Spoelstra, because I thought there was a ceiling that this team needed to reach. And kind of relating back to the first segment, like, even if it's a little clunky, you've got to try to hash out some chemistry between Tyler Herro, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo so that this team can reach its ceiling. Because Tyler Herro's shot-making ability and his playmaking ability is so far and beyond anybody else on this roster, his just God-given gifts, so beyond whatever else is on this roster, that it's worth taking the time to try to figure out a way for this to work. But I think with 22 games left, and Tyler Herro is already listed out for Tuesday night's game against the Pistons, so it's going to be a few more games before he even comes back. And now it's like this right foot. It's not even the hyperextended knee. It's this right foot injury that has cropped back up that bothered him earlier in the year and even as a rookie. And so, like, I don't know when he's coming back. And if it's going to be that problematic, maybe it's not like a long-term thing here if you're Erik Spoelstra, but you could sell it to Tyler Herro as in, hey, look, we have a very short runway to ramp up for the playoffs here. We don't know the status of your foot. We're going to manage this to make sure you are fresh for the playoffs and you don't miss the whole dang thing like you did last year. We're going to be bringing you off the bench so we can monitor your minutes and your health, and we're going to stick with Duncan Robinson in that starting lineup. So I think that could be on the table, or I would argue it probably should be on the table, at least for these next 22 games and possibly even in the playoffs.
I think the option is more readily available now than it has been in the past. Like there are legit reasons here, like basketball reasons, and for the betterment of the team. Given and we talked about this before, like there is a lack of chemistry between Tyler, considering the amount of time that he's missed over the course of the season, that might be potentially detrimental to his team, and has been basically mitigated by Duncan's ascendance this season. Like he has been playing so well, and he's such a seamless fit with his starting unit that it almost, again, makes sense from a basketball perspective to consider bringing Tyler off the bench. And he would thrive in that role. This isn't necessarily a knock there. You know, again, there's perception,
He
there's
was the
ego
best player
management.
in the year at it.
Yeah.
The sixth man of the year a few years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And Miami, again, did not lack for any kind of playoff success with him coming off the bench either. So, you know, that's they were the 1 seed when he was coming off the bench. You know, he didn't become the starter until last year. And again, they've had success. And many people point to, again, that Miami's playoff run might not have happened had Tyler not been hurt. I don't know if I'd go that far. I can understand the logic behind that way of thinking because, well, when it happened, there's no way of knowing it. But I don't know that you can count on that either. You're going to need Tyler. And I think you're more dangerous with Tyler.
Yes.
But I also think that if you can bring him off the bench and he could light your second unit up for 20 easy buckets, 20 points easily off the bench, why not do that? Like his offense, I'm much less concerned about in terms of like his ability to generate on his own than Duncan. Duncan can and has shown the ability to get to the rim now that he did not show earlier in his career. There's always the 3-point shooting, but I think it's also just a better fit alongside guys that operate or tend to operate in the mid-range like Jimmy and like Bam. Whereas Tyler, who also operates in the mid-range, now he'd have the whole reign of the second unit. Like it would be him and Caleb, Kevin Love, who knows who else would be Haywood Highsmith, Jaime Jaquez. Like I think that unit would flourish more effectively. And I've said this pretty much all season long. Like I think there were legitimate reasons for it. And as much as Tyler has taken a leap, we're at a point now where I still think his offense might be better coming off the bench. And that's not a knock. It's just It's hard for us collectively to change your idea of what that means to be coming off the bench. And I think also he could be a closer. Like it wouldn't necessarily mean that he's prevented from being part of the closing unit. You're going to need his offense out there, and he's the Miami's best bucket getter, hands down. Like him and I think even better than Jimmy. Yeah,
those two.
And so if you're going to need a bucket in the waning moments of a game, Tyler's going to be on the floor, and I think he should take pride in that.
We saw the Warriors do this with Jordan Poole during their championship run, where they brought him off the bench, and in those games that he caught fire, he was playing 35 minutes a game and closing games alongside Steph and Clay and Draymond, right? And so if Tyler Herro had those kind of games in the playoffs, he could close games with Jimmy, with Bam, even with Duncan Robinson, with the amount of spacing. You put another forward on the floor, and that could still be a dangerous unit. You mentioned Duncan Robinson's leap. That's the other thing about this, too, is what Tyler Herro used to provide in terms of playmaking and shot creation was so far and beyond what Duncan Robinson could create that you needed to try to figure out ways for Tyler Herro and Jimmy and Duncan and Bam to exist. Now you don't really need to do that because Duncan Robinson can attack closeouts. He can even run pick and roll with Bam Adebayo. He's getting to the basket. Like his dynamic game, he has closed the gap between him and Tyler Herro. And so when you have all that extra shot creation stuff that Duncan Robinson is providing, those other things that Tyler Herro was providing that Duncan Robinson used to not provide, Duncan Robinson's able to now provide a little bit of that. And so I think that's really important. Bam, Jimmy, and Duncan on the court together this year have a net rating of plus 8.3, an offensive rating of 117.1. Replace Duncan with Tyler Herro, with Bam and Jimmy. Those units have a net rating of plus 5.9 and an offensive rating of 114. That's the difference between a ho-hum team and a very good team. The difference between with Duncan Robinson, what would be a top 10 offense in offensive rating and a bottom 10 offense in offensive rating. That's the difference. And you can't really attribute it sometimes. I think Tyler Herro is still a better player than Duncan Robinson in a vacuum. He's one of, like you said, Miami's best shot creators. There's no reason why the unit with him should be offensively worse than the unit with Duncan Robinson. But basketball's not just played in a vacuum and one-on-one, right? There's chemistry. There's five-man units. There's just ways that guys play off of each other. And Duncan has been so smart about, hey, Jimmy and Bam, they take the mid-range shots. I take the three-pointers. I balance our shot chart so that it tilts more efficiently, where when Tyler's in there, it just tilts a little bit less efficient because now we got three guys who want to take those mid-range shots. So I think I'm at the point now where Long term, I think the team is going to be best with Tyler Herro figuring it out next to Jimmy and Bam, but there's just not enough
You don't
time
have
to
time
figure
right
it
now.
out right now. So just stick
Yeah.
with Duncan and go from there because you have to worry about the championship this year.
And if the other option is benching Terry Rozier, well, the day that Tyler has the incredible burst to get to the rim the way that Rozier can at this point in his career, then they can have that conversation. I still think right now Rozier is. It's all about being the more complementary player. Like his attacks
And he's
on the
been much more
rim.
deferential too to Jimmy and Bam, and I think that just empowers Jimmy and Bam to go do, especially Jimmy. Hey, if I'm the guy, I'm just going to do more. When Tyler Herro's playing with Jimmy does feel like, hey, I could just give the ball to Tyler, right? Because that guy's a hooper. I can go give it to him, and he'll take care of stuff. When Tyler's not on the court, I think it does empower Jimmy to just be like, or not even empower, forces him to kind of go more into takeover mode. And when he's like that, that we know that's when Miami's
Kind of
at
chicken
their
the egg,
best, right?
but I mean it's a valid point. I don't know. I know people are going to say, "Oh, you've been critical of Tyler all season or multiple seasons." But I
don't know.
I think you can have this conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'm a fan of Tyler's. I covered his rookie season. I know what he's been capable of, and you and I have been high on him from day one. Like what we saw from him and the expectation of what he was able to provide. Like he's lived up to that and surpassed it. But it's about being a better complementary player in that starting unit. And again, I feel like we can change the conversations. Like you don't have to be like, you're not a scrub because you come off the bench. It's all about being able to be a star in that role. And I think that, as cliche as it sounds, I think he would be a superstar in that role.
A few more tweaks that Erik Spoelstra can make to turn the Heat into legit contenders. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. And you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. You'll find it all, but only if you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Are you an everydayer? Make sure you are subscribed and tune in Tuesday night for a recap of the Heat's game against the Detroit Pistons. We'll have our biggest takeaways from the game. Hopefully be handing out some credit cookies. Congrats to Erik Spoelstra for being named the Eastern Conference Coach of the Month for February. A couple more tweaks that he can make to turn the Heat into title contenders. I'm just framing it that way because, I mean, we think that the Heat are title contenders, but there's just a few more things with 20 games left, a quarter of the way, that Erik Spoelstra is going to want to experiment with. And one of the things that he's been experimenting with lately has been starting Nikola Jovic. And I use the word experiment on purpose because I don't know that Spo has made up his mind that this is permanent.
Yeah.
And with all the injuries, especially to Tyler Herro, you want to inject a little bit more offense and a little bit more transition attack and stuff like that into that starting lineup. But so far this year, it's been weird for Nico, right? Like he's going from being in the starting lineup to out of the rotation completely. But he has gotten better as the season has gone on, and I think that
you would imagine a young player who is gaining experience would.
They are 10-8 with Nico as the starting power forward. His net rating, or Miami's net rating with Bam and Nico as their starting front court, they're outscoring teams by 12.2 points every 100 possessions, according to Cleaning the Glass.
Dynamic.
Their offensive rating in the half court, and this is the biggest stat that I could find, and my jaw dropped when I saw this. Their offensive rating in the half court is almost 8 points per 100 possessions better with Nikola Jovic on the court than without him. That is a crazy stat. That is a big stat for this Heat team that struggles to score in the half court historically. A big part of so let's just start there. Like when you see those stats, when you hear those stats, do you think that Nico should be the starting power forward going forward?
I kind of do. I think his defense is still problematic, but I think the size component of it is one that's going to be beneficial to Miami. And maybe it would be matchup dependent, and I'm fine with that too. Like I think we were asked this in a recent episode, like, could you start Jovic against the Boston Celtics? I would feel more comfortable putting him up against Kristaps Porzingis, who's not necessarily a physical player at 7'4", rather than say a fully healthy New York Knicks team, OG Anunoby or Julius Randle. So, I mean, those are. I think you could change that lineup around. I think, That's it. I think you can put him in as a need-to-need basis, and I think yes, he can thrive there. So I right now for the rest of the regular season, I would continue to do so in the hopes that he will continue to tweak his game, to make improvements, and to get more comfortable going up against a myriad of different situations. But when the playoffs come, as you just pointed out earlier in the first segment, like you can make certain tweaks, you can make changes. It can be lined up and playoff matchup dependent. So I think that's where we're standing right now.
I thought it was really interesting that Erik Spoelstra decided to go ahead and start him against Denver, even though that there was a finals rematch and a playoff atmosphere to that, and a team that played their starter, like 7 guys basically, most of those minutes, but Spo still threw him out there just to go see, hey, can you stand up against Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic and that big Denver team? And I don't know that Jovic had his best game this season, but he wasn't playing off the floor either. And I thought he's gotten better. I thought he played really valuable minutes in that recent game against Milwaukee before the All-Star break.
Yes.
He's 6'10". He's got at least 5 inches on the other options, whether it's Haywood Highsmith or Caleb Martin at power forward. I still wouldn't rule out Caleb Martin starting. Caleb Martin has closed a lot of games at power forward, whatever. If it's Jimmy or Caleb or whoever you put at that power forward spot, doesn't really matter. But those are the other options. But him being at 6'10", and the couple of things that I've noticed him get better at, not just the positioning and the rebounding defensively, all that stuff, his fouls have gone down. He was averaging 1.9 fouls per game before he was out of the rotation. So for like the first big stretch of the regular season, this recent stretch where he's been starting, that's been down to 1.4 personal fouls per game. You kind of go bigger picture per 36 numbers. Those numbers are even more stark. Like he's averaging like 1.2 fouls less per 36 minutes, so like starters minutes, than he was before. So the fouls coming down, the defensive positioning is better, the shot selection I think is a lot better. You're shooting 40%
rebounding
before,
has been better.
50. The rebounding has been better. His decision making on offense has been better. He's been more willing to quickly take those 3-pointers when they're open. Not taking like weird, like let me play with the ball a little bit and just like kind of fumble myself
shooting like
into a layup.
60+% from the corner.
Overall.
Like his corner threes are like, I mean, they're historically like it blows PJ Tucker out of the water. What
it's a small sample size, but absolutely, like he's hitting them. And then, and like you said, the rebounding, he's turning those into. He's like unlike when Kevin Love grabs the rebound and looks for the outlet and stuff. Like Nico just grabs it and goes like he's trying to make a yellow light. You know, like it adds some juice and some funk into Miami's offense that it doesn't otherwise have. So I don't know that him starting is the answer, but I love that Erik Spoelstra is experimenting with it for now, and I think he should continue over these next 20 games to figure out if Nico is ready for real playoff minutes or even being a starter in the playoffs. But then the flip side of that, too, is another obvious tweak in the playoffs is if he's not ready, you just put Caleb Martin in there, who you trust in the playoffs. And then, boom, that should, at least hypothetically be just sort of an improvement to your overall team come playoff time. But
is there a playoff matchup where you think having Nico is helpful or disadvantageous?
I don't know yet. Like against Joel Embiid, I'd be terrified if Joel Embiid comes back.
Fair enough.
But against the Bucks, like I said, I kind of liked him in that matchup. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app. Remember to tune in Tuesday night for a recap of the Miami Heat's game against the Detroit Pistons.